So hopefully this moves. There we go. We've been going for 20 years, and actually we're part of 47 community foundations throughout the country. And we all work in that similar way, that really we are sort of a hub for lots of different funding to come together, which in its essence then makes it quite tricky to explain all the essence of what we do, because there is so much to us. But obviously on the screen here, we're here for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly by awarding small grants to grassroots organisations who are working to overcome the challenges of disadvantage, exclusion and poverty in their communities. And when we say grassroots, we don't mean that there's a certain limit to how much funds people have. It's really that essence of, are you working on the ground for the Cornish community? So if you can say we're covering the community, then you probably are a good fit. So we've grown quite significantly. I think we're a team of 14 now, and COVID really, I suppose, catalysed that. So since 2003, we've awarded over £20 million and supported over 8,000 local projects. So feels sad to say in some ways that 2024 was our record-breaking year, because you don't really want to be breaking those records. But we distributed over £3.2 million and supported 675 projects. To put that into context, the National Lottery did a similar number to around 100 projects, because obviously they're working with larger grants. So although we give smaller grants, it goes a long way. There's the map to show you exactly where those grants went. So we cover the whole of the Cornish community. We want Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly to be a great place for everyone to live, a place where people work together to address disadvantage and build strong, resilient communities. Where our reach can take us is far and wide, and the types of group we support are far and wide too. But there's probably are some limits on that. There are people that can and can't apply. So there might be some different things that you think, oh, we sort of fit that and we sort of don't with others. So what you need to apply, and this is something we can talk about and develop, but the crux of it is a recognised governing document. So that might be a written constitution and articles of association, or just simply a list of governing rules, the rules that you would follow. We then ask for a minimum of 3 unrelated members on your board. It might be trustees, directors, committee members. We then ask, depending on the type of group you are, that those details are registered in the right place. So if that's a registered charity, it's on the Charity Commission website. If you're a CIC, we ask for it on Companies House. We do then ask for a safeguarding policy. That's the only strict policy that we ask for, because safeguarding is paramount. We do sometimes get, oh, well, we do not work with children, so we don't need that safeguarding policy. But it really is, you're always working with some sort of vulnerable person. So no matter the type of group you are, we ask for a safeguarding policy. And then on the financial side, we ask for you to have a bank account, and then we ask for the end of year accounts. If you've been going for a year, if you haven't been going for a year, you can't provide them, so that's not a problem. But as long as you then are able to give us a bank statement within the last 3 months. So I always think that's your 6 things to tick off your list. Obviously, there are some parameters of who we can't. We are primarily for the Cornish community. So if you're not benefiting people that live in Cornwall, then you might be going to Devon Community Foundation, Somerset. There might be other places for you to go, but we need to make sure that it stays within the Cornish community. We can't fund retrospective grants. That basically means you can't then turn up with a receipt that you've already purchased something and say, can I have funds for that? It can't be something in the past. Groups with significant financial free reserves. We do have groups that have reserves, but actually if you're able to explain where those reserves are going, because we do often understand that there are some reserves in place, but we need just clarification on that. Groups whose beneficiaries are not people. This is one where I explain there is different forms to that. For example, we support groups that are perhaps working with animals, but their therapy is for people. So the core of it is for a person, but on the surface, it may not look like you are a people-based charity. And then various things like contribution to endowment. We can't give funds for you to pass on funds. And if a grant hasn't been dealt with directly, if you haven't given back impact reports and various things, and nothing that influences people's religious choices. Of course, we can support churches because often they are places that are the hubs for the community, as long as they're not influencing the person's religious choice. Hopefully that all makes sense. But the nitty-gritty, I suppose, of what makes us different is we manage over 70 different funds. May not look like it on the surface. If you were to go onto our website today, look down available grants, I think there's 4 on there. Many people might then look at that and go, oh, those 4, they don't fit me, so I can't apply to CCF. And I go, no, please, there is so much more to us than that. So really, they all work in different ways. So if we were to put them all on our website at once, it would be overwhelming for us and yourselves. So I wanted to get into an explanation of how they sort of all work, why they're not on the website at once, and why you should always come to us and ask us for further info. So here's my little, I like visuals, so I've put it on there for you. So the circles, I suppose, represent how they run, how they're structured. Deadline funds are often those funds that are put on our website. They have a very clear opening date and a very clear closing date. So they'll be put on and then they'll disappear. There's a couple that are quite specific, so we put them on there at all times, but often they will have an open and close deadline date. However, we do have quite a lot that are sort of those rolling funds that trickle underneath throughout the year. As and when we have conversations, we can almost then matchmake you to that specific fund. Because we're working with small grants, you can imagine the more matches we make, the pot depletes, and there's going to be moments where there's little funds in those pots, so they have to be put on pause while we talk to the fund holder. We gather further funds into that pot and it can be tapped into again. If they're on the website, we'd be taking that one off, then that week take the other off. So it really is then a case of talking to ourselves. Often I'm a good point of call because I have knowledge of all of those funds put together and I can almost then matchmake that process. So because there's 70 different funds, there's lots of different opportunities. Those 3 in the middle is sort of how they are categorised. I say that we've got a lot of locational funds, which is always a good base to start with, because if you can very clearly say you are based there or you have a lot of beneficiaries in that area, then that is a great place to start because you can just apply to that locational pot, and often you don't have to be a certain type of group. You can, if you can say you are benefiting that location, then you fit the criteria. So that's one way to look at it and apply to. Then you have sort of thematic side. So we have a lot of funds that offer certain types of beneficiaries. So if you know you work with a certain type of group, that is a pot you can then tap into. So we have a fund for young people and young people's mental health. We have a fund for those supporting people with disabilities. So if you can then sort of pinpoint certain theme of work that you are doing, that's a pot you can tap into. Then the final one is a little bit different. We've got a couple of funds that are directly for an individual. So we've got a young and talented fund. You could be a young person that applies. We've got something called SWEF, which is for young people who are starting a business. But we also have funds that are for individuals, but we can't give the funds directly to the individuals themselves. So we have something called the Crisis Fund, becomes the Surviving Winter Fund in the winter. And that is for individuals in crisis. So they may need £50 because their washing machine's broken and they can't afford the repairs at that moment. Rather than those applying directly to us, a community group that they are part of, and those groups really understand who they work with and their needs, they apply for a pot of money. that they can then disperse to individuals in their care. So it's another route that you can go down with us. That's what I love about CCF, is there's so much to us and so much opportunity. It's not a case of, I know this type of fund and I know they deliver this funding, and it's sort of a one and done sort of thing. With CCF, it's very much a relationship then, and a partnership that you can come back and try a different fund and go for something else and just keep that going. We've got groups that we've supported for those 20 years that we've existed. Drama Express, I had to put this one in. If anyone had come to our 20-year celebration at Truro Cathedral, they performed there. And just to show a flavour of the type of groups that we can work with, Drama Express most recently had something called the Clare Milne Fund, which is that fund that supports those supporting people with disabilities. They got a £2,000 grant. It allowed them to take their show schools out at Sockley Hall to the Minack. Great way to then get that group that our performance group that support people with disabilities, that give them opportunities to perform, which is fabulous. So a lot of different groups that we can support. How it works, because we are that sort of for the Cornish community, smaller grant provider, we try and keep that process as simple as possible. Funding can be a daunting task, so we try to keep it as simple as possible, having myself in there to help, but also making the process simple. So it's an online application. Generally, it's made up of an initial general information, a sort of budget breakdown, which is always very useful to get to the nitty-gritty of. And then it's usually made up of 3 questions, 100 words limit, which is a blessing and a curse sometimes, sort of around what the project is and what you would want the money for, what is the need and what would the impact be. That will then get sent off to the assessor. So you could have got that application form directly from myself, or you could have found it on the website on available grants. We have 4 grants officers that are all responsible for different funds. It will get sent to one of those, and either they will assess it or some of our external assessors that we use. A great unique thing about us is we will always then ask more questions. We have the capacity to do that. We are in the Cornish community. We're not a large charity that might not have the ability to be able to ask those questions. So it'll be a simple email with some questions on, send us an email back, or when would be a good time to have a phone call if there is anything that we're unsure of. Because we work with groups that it might be their first ever application and they've not put a digit quite right, or something just doesn't add up and you want to get that further information. We're not going to then put you in a no pile. We're going to try and find out more about that. So then when it either goes to a panel or sometimes it can go directly to the fund holders themselves, we're able to paint that best picture because we've thought about things that have come up. Those questions might come up in a panel and we've already then asked the questions to deliver. Then they will make a decision, you're informed of your decision, and hopefully the grant is received. Woo! If it isn't, then we will move you around. We'll find ways to continue to support. And then generally a year is our process, but it depends on the fund. Years passed and we will give you an end of grants report, which is very simply paragraphs about what happened, a few pictures, so that we can send that off, we can celebrate your work. And then ultimately we've got that. So when you apply again, we know that you have dealt with that funding well. So a simple process as possible. And to get, I suppose, into the details of what we'd like to see in an application, it's always good to hear it from actually a funder's perspective. Is I always think a good strength in an application is you've really demonstrated that you understand the need. You haven't come up with an idea that I think this would be useful in the area. You've actually got some evidence to back that up. You've spoken to the local community and know the needs there. So if you can demonstrate that the need is there, fabulous. If you can show how your project represents value for money, you've thought about different staffing costs or volunteer costs and good value for that. We're not throwing, I want £200 an hour for this service. If your impact is measurable, that's really good, because then you've got that evidence to take away. Your project is sustainable and you have shown about the environmental impact. That's really important, I think, at the moment in the current climate. A lot of funders really want to see how you're thinking, I suppose, with a green eye, how you've thought that this project will be sustainable, not only in a monetary way, but actually sustainable for the future. We have a lot of sort of solar farm funds that do like to see money go towards different sustainable projects. So actually, if you wanted a piece of equipment, X is more expensive because it's made out of materials that will be sustainable in the long run, or they will then support that more expensive cause. But common errors, I suppose, a lot that may lead to unsuccessful bids, but actually might just lengthen the process. The number one I'd say is if your project doesn't fit the criteria. The criteria is the easiest way for someone to objectively say yes or no. Because of really, we'd probably want to give money to everyone, because a lot of the time our projects are really, really good projects, but sometimes the money won't stretch. And so an easier way to objectively say is if it didn't fit the criteria of what the fund was looking for. The reason I'm going back to budget is if the budget is unclear, because we work with those smaller amounts, we need to know sort of where, not every pound, because it's very difficult to see where each pound is going, but to make that budget as clear as you can will always instill more trust that you've thought about what you're going to do with your funding. Documents are missing or unclear. It's one we get often. Sometimes if the documents that are provided are out of date, it just makes the process a lot longer. We will ask those questions to find those documents or get a more up-to-date version, but it's just going to make the process take a lot longer. And if your application leaves the assessor with too many questions, I always say you want to think about what questions might be asked and try and answer them beforehand. So you're sending off your application and think they would not be able to ask me a single question about this because I've already thought of them. Because that's going to lengthen the process as well. We're going to ask more questions. And ultimately, it may then lead to, if those questions can't be answered, an unsuccessful application, which we don't want. So generally, I suppose that's what we would be looking for in the assessment. Hopefully would then lead to a successful application. And I suppose that is me. I'm expecting lots of different questions, which I will always answer and love to do. After today, I'll send you some different links to different ways we can help, because that is now what my role is there for. So you're able to book a one-to-one support session with me. It's just, you can scan the QR code now, it should lead you to there. But if you ever want to have a half-hour session with me, just ask questions, or you want me to read through a draft of an application, I'm able to do that. Any ways that you would like some help, come to me. Signing up to our newsletter is a great way to keep up to date with those sort of deadline funds coming out, and finding out what's happening grants-wise. I'm doing drop-in sessions every month, so I'm in St Day on the 2nd of May around our Cornish Lithium Fund. I'm in Launceston a little bit later, so I'll be popping around the county. And I'm doing more and more sessions like this. So I'm doing some sessions about being application ready and looking into those 6 documents that we would need, how you would go about that, why we need them, and more throughout the year. So just trying to be as transparent as possible, having that connection between fund holders and yourselves. Probably a whistle-stop tour there of information. So we'll stop recording now, so you're not recorded asking any questions.